Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid. We've had a little complication right before the show, but that's always. Without further ado, we're going to bring in our special guest, my colleague, and my guy, Larry Johnson. I got to bring him in here. Let's see if StreamYard will allow it.
There we go.
Larry, how's it going?
Good, man.
How's it going?
It's been too
good
long.
to see you. Good. Yeah, it has been. Larry, let me tell you, before we get into everything, I don't know if it's StreamYard or I don't know if it's YouTube, but it seems like every single show I've have a problem with either the streaming and I have backup internet. I have problems with the audio or like the freezing up of everything, and I complain to both and neither does anything. So that's what we have to do to get to the truth. But man, since I've talked to you, all hell is broken loose. They're thinking about arresting Trump. It seems like the government is just going mad, and they're tripling and quadrupling down on failed policies in Ukraine and in Africa and in Asia. What is going on, and what is on the mind of these lunatic people who are at the helm of the car in Washington?
You've got to wonder if somebody is deliberately trying to, set the world on fire. That this is a deliberate plan. But I've been on government long enough to see these kinds of disasters as they unfold to realize that usually it's not because of a plan; it's just because of genuine incompetence and short-sightedness. There is no strategic vision guiding anything that's taking place right now. What do I mean by strategic vision? If the goal of the United States is to remain the preeminent economic and military power in the world, then how do we do that? Well, it would seem to me one of the strategies would be to make sure that we have most countries that are supporting us and in our camp. That would be number one. Number two, that we've got the vast majority of countries willing to use our currency and to let us operate as the international standard for financial and economic exchanges. But what we've done instead, and let's say from a standpoint of military, that we want to make sure that we are so potent militarily that no one could dare challenge us. Those would be, let's call those the strategic vision. Well, what do we have? Let's start on the military side. We provoked a fight with Russia using Ukraine as a proxy. And this is something the United States has done for the last 60 years, going back to Vietnam. And in the course of this, we have completely emptied, it would seem, our storehouses of ammunition, particularly 155 millimeter artillery shells and HIMARS missiles. So we've emptied them out. We've had little effect on the battlefield in Ukraine. So what we demonstrated is that our weapons are not necessarily the best, the most effective, and they're certainly not Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons that change the course of time. On the economic front, we decided to impose sanctions on Russia, which is the most resource-rich country in the world. And in the course of that, found out that Russia is sufficient and that Russia has actually things we need, like uranium, among others, and oil and gas that are critical to Europe's economic survival. Instead, we not only isolate Russia, try to punish Russia, but then in the course of this, enable Russia and China to forge a relationship that they have not had since Russia and China existed as countries. They have never had the kind of cooperative relationship that we see them in right now. And in fact, to the television to my right here, the Putin-Xi press conference is going live right now in Moscow. And they just signed an agreement between each other. It's hugs and kisses all around. So the United States now has succeeded in joining the largest, or the second largest country in the world, which has a major, enormous industrial capability and is a critical supplier to the United States, which is China, with Russia, which is ample supplies of oil and gas that China needs, but more importantly, Russia provides weapon systems that China needs. So it's a marriage made in heaven. And now with the union of those two countries, the United States is now number 3, number 4. We're at a clear disadvantage because China and Russia have now joined forces, which was something that U.S. strategic policy tried to prevent, going back to Richard Nixon's visit to China in 1972. So on the economic front, on the military front, and then on the political front, the United States coming across as a bully. If we don't like what you're doing, we're gonna cut off your money. Well, in the process of that, more and more countries are saying, I don't want to be under that kind of pressure. I'm going to find an alternative. And so I think it was Indonesia yesterday. The president of Indonesia just announced, screw MasterCard and Visa. We're getting rid of those. We're going to use our own card or a mirror card, something that the Russians produce, or the Chinese also have a credit card. We're going to go with that. Well, all of a sudden, the U.S. control of the world economy is slipping away. And that's been important for the U.S. economy domestically, because we've been able to finance our economy borrowing money from foreigners. And they borrowed money because they thought the United States as the reserve currency was the safe place where they could invest their money. That's gone. That has changed. So, yeah, it's a mess is the easiest way to put it.
Well, there's an old saying that says, when you're in a hole, stop digging. But it seems like the leadership continues to look for the biggest shovel to continue to dig, making the hole deeper. And it seems like there's no rational or sound thinking in the whole of Washington, because one would think if you continue to fail at a certain thing, and you continue to see bad ramifications of that, you would adjust your policy just a little bit. But it seems like they have tunnel vision, whether it's domestic politics with Donald Trump, or whether it's trying to contain Russia or China or Iran or Venezuela. And what I want to pose to you is this: do they see what everybody else see, or are they just so inebriated on what America used to be, and the policy and the policy and the power that she used to that she used to?
No,
this is a spam call. I'm sorry. I was trying to
that's all right.
But those spam. Maybe it's the people in Washington D.C. mad at me or something. But
they're mad at truth tellers. They're mad at truth tellers, brother.
do they sit down and do they think about what everybody is saying? Because it seems like they're ignoring not only rational and sound guidance from their own domestic public, but it seems like they are hell bent on pushing through their policies at the expense of the American public and the world at large, and are looking like they're ready to risk World War III to push their policies.
Yeah, just on the phone before coming on your show with a buddy of mine, retired CIA officer. He was served overseas in the variety. He was a case officer and a senior manager with the CIA. And he's now retired, but continues to work with the U.S. military and scripting exercises, and still has access to intelligence. And he was telling me what he's seeing is shocking, because there is such the intelligence that's being presented to senior leaders in the military and the political side, the Biden White House, is completely misleading, and it's reflecting a groupthink. And from an analytical standpoint, you're not getting any alternative views. So everybody has decided that they're presenting the world as filled with candy canes and unicorns, and that the unicorns eat gold coins, and that this is true in reality, and that's literally sort of the message that's being presented. There's no stepping back to try to put all of this in any kind of strategic context. Number one, but number two, and let me just give you an example. The intelligence is reporting that the Russians are suffering massive casualties, massive, more so than the Ukrainians. Okay, except there's one problem with that. Ukrainian sources admit the Russians are firing between 6 and 10 times the number of artillery rounds that the Ukrainians are. So it's a 6-to-1 advantage. Let's put it in simpler terms. I'm going to give you 6 bullets to put into a gun. I'm going to go back 30 yards and I'm going to have 60 bullets. Who's got the best chance of hitting somebody, huh? Yeah, I'll put my money on me. So, how in the world can Ukraine be inflicting more casualties when Russia's firing far more artillery shells at them? And this is but one example. Instead of dealing with the reality, they keep on with the happy talk. So it is genuine deception. Now, I saw a fascinating History Channel video last night. It was about that little fellow, that corporal from Germany, who went on to cause a big problem in 1939, 1940, 41. And his girlfriend, mistress, Eva Braun, had shot all these home movies, but they're all silent. Well, they've developed a technology now that you can actually read the lips and find out what they were saying. And they did an experiment where they filmed with the same camera somebody today, and they took down a transcript of what he was saying, but they did not give it to the operator of this technology. He had to figure it out himself, and lo and behold, it matched up exactly. So what you find out of this conversation, when this little corporal was talking, at one point, instead of the screaming and everything that he did in public, he was talking rationally and normally. And in private, he was at least admitting, yeah, man, those Soviets, they're really good. They're creating some real problems for us. He was saying the kind of stuff that he'd never say in public. So you got to hold out some hope that, not Biden. I mean, Biden doesn't even know where he is most of the time. But you have to hope that people like Blinken or Newland or Jake Sullivan in private are saying something sane, because what they're saying in public is totally insane. It's crazy.
I wouldn't put my faith in Blinken and Sullivan and Newland, because it seems like they have a vendetta, an inherent vendetta for Russia, and they're willing to drive America into the ground to push their vendetta against Russia, and we see that in their policies. But what about the generals? I know the generals say things public, like you heard former General Patriots talking about bombing Russia and we'll do this to Russia and all. But behind closed doors, the reality should set into them that Russia has far more advanced weapons, like the hypersonic missiles that they have, the black hole submarines, the avant-garde, the new strategic ballistic missile that can travel 10,000 kilometers or something, and then the underwater submersible that can ravage a coast. It seems like to me, with all the false bravado that is spoken publicly, behind closed doors, they should be talking about the ramifications of the policies and then trying to implement something rational that can bring this thing to an end. But it seems like to me that they are continuing to poke the bear. No pun intended. They're continuing to poke the bear.
Yeah.
Make sense out of that.
No, it doesn't. it does not make sense. I would feel much more comfortable if we saw at least one senior military official sit down, come in public, and say, uh, we've we've disparaged the Russians as having an inept, incompetent, ineffective military for years. He says that's just really a mistake. We shouldn't do that. We need to recognize that Russia has a modern army, that Vladimir Putin, under his leadership, took decisive steps going back to 2014 to really upgrade, modernize the army, getting it functioning like a modern army should. And one of the hallmarks of that is their logistics trail. They're able to supply their troops on the front line with a seemingly unlimited supply, for example, of artillery shells. And they've been very effective at taking care of casualties and getting the wounded back into medical, getting them the proper medical care that they need in order to survive. So let's see, we need to acknowledge that Russia also, as you correctly noted, has advanced hypersonic missiles that we, the United States, still can't deploy. We can't even field one that's operational and that works, whereas Russia's fielded three. And they've already demonstrated that some of these are nuclear bunker busters. That means it can hit a bunker designed to resist a nuclear blast and destroy it. The Russians demonstrated that last March, a year ago. So we got to admit, you're not hearing a single general, not a single one, say anything approaching that. Instead, they keep up with this nonsense about the Russia's filled with a bunch of conscripts and convicts, and their morale is low, their fighting skills terrible. It's just, why lie to yourself? You know, if you're fat and overweight and girls don't like you, then you need to look in the mirror and go, hey, I need to lose some weight, need to start working out, need to cut the carbs. All right. Stop telling yourself that you look like Don Juan. So I just and we're doing that, Rashid, we're doing that kind of lying to ourselves. That's what is so disturbing, that this is not just a fake propaganda campaign. These people genuinely believe this crap, and it's ridiculous.
But isn't that a key recipe for the collapse of the American Republic and the American Empire, to be so delusional or so detached from reality, and to continue to harp on your accomplishments 40 years ago and the power and the influence that you used to wield, and you're trying to impose that at a weaker stage of your existence on others, and not acknowledging the reality, the new reality, or the new paradigm that is taking place and shaping a new world. Isn't that?
Yeah.
Aren't those fissures in the dam of the empire that soon the water will start breaking through?
Yeah. Listen, this reminds me. A few years back, I went home up in the Kansas City area, and my nephew, who at the time he was like just turned 18. Now this kid, soaking wet, weighed maybe 145 pounds. All right. He had never played any kind of football, organized football, in middle school or high school. And so, and he was 145 pounds wiry, but not muscular, not fast. And he sat there and he told me, yeah, I'm trying out for the Kansas City Chiefs this summer. I'm going to make the team. And I'm going, dude, that ain't happening. You can sit there and tell yourself that. You can genuinely believe it, but it's not going to be true. He'd get hit like a bug hitting a windshield, man. It'd be done, splattered. Well, we're seeing the same kind of thing with our military and our political leaders. That same kind of delusional belief. And this kid wasn't making it up. I mean, he genuinely believed that. And no amount of trying to, have the old uncle talk with him and say, hey, son, look, I don't know what you're smoking or what you're taking, but you need to get off it. We Millie the other day with Lloyd Austin, I wrote an article titled "The Tweedledee and Tweedledummer." Take your choice. Who's between those two clowns?
Yes, I
But
read it.
Millie he went on and on and on about, oh, Russia's weak because Russia needs it's relying upon Iran and North Korea for weapons. I'm going, okay, wait a second. You're out here announcing that over 40 countries are supplying Ukraine. So if your standard is that if Russia's got two countries supplying it with stuff, oh boy, Russia's in trouble. Well, what does that say about Ukraine? They got 40 countries needing to back them up to keep them in the fight. Think of it like a boxing match. Russia's got two guys in its corner. Ukraine's got 40 guys. and the guy with 40 guys is just getting his ass beat. So
it's insane. And another thing, the hubris is outrageous because America is openly announcing multiple aid packages to Ukraine, even though Russia has shown its ability to match the entire Western world's military industrial complex by the artillery and the missiles that they're using, that even American NATO can't even keep up with or match.
right.
But they're openly announcing multiple financial packages and multiple aid packages, and then they want to say if China gives Russia this, then that's a red line, or if North Korea or if Iran does this is a red line. If that is not the height of imperial hubris, what is?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It is. Um, this is like, you and I, we're close in age. You think back like at what you do, what you could do in high school when you're playing football. I mean, you probably played football. I did, and what I could do back then. And if I pretend that I could still do then what I am now, no, it's not going to happen. Somebody's going to get hurt, and it's going to be me. So the United States lives in the past. If you go back at the start of World War II in the United States, you had lots of unemployed people around the country. You had idle factories. The United States was this sleeping giant that I think is one of Yamamoto, the general in the Japanese army and at the time, said that we've awakened a sleeping giant. So at the time, the United States could spin up these plants, and the plants were remarkable. They were producing 140 aircraft, a day, not a month, a day. They were producing ships by the dozens in a month. Tanks. We produced 40,000 tanks over a period of 3.5 years. Well, guess what? Russia also, the then Soviet Union, they had a similar industrial capability, except they had to actually pack theirs up from places like Kiev and haul it east over the Ural Mountains to protect it from the Nazis. Well, let's jump ahead now, 80 years later. The United States still pretends that it's got that ability, but we don't. I mean, when I grew up, my dad worked in a steel mill in Kansas City at Armco Steel. It used to be called Sheffield Steel. Then it became Armco. Then it disappeared. So all that steel making capability in Kansas City, gone. There were other there were automobile plants, closed. There were farm equipment camps like International Harvester, closed. So the United States has basically hollowed itself out with its industrial capability to actually build things. Russia has not. And the United States still pretends that we can do that, except we're in the era where it takes 6-7 years to produce an aircraft carrier. During World War II, we were able to turn out an aircraft carrier, I believe, at the height of about once every 2 months. Maybe it was 1 month. Think about that. A massive aircraft carrier built from nothing to something in a month, 30 days, 60 days. Now it takes us 6-7 years We're lucky, and it costs 10, 12 billion dollars now. Uh, Fighter aircraft that were produced in a day in World War II. Now, if you're going to get an F-35, you're looking at what, a year and a half, 2 years. So this complete disconnect where our technology, we've wanting to rely upon very sophisticated technology, which adds to complexity, which adds to cost, which adds to the human element involved in terms of the training and the support network needed to sustain such systems. And we're going up against the Russians, who have been much more pragmatic in uh, their design of military weaponry, as well as their strategy for what it is that they're going to do to protect and preserve the lives of their soldiers. So we live with this delusion. The United States is thinking that it's still 17 years old, able to play defensive end in high school football, and it's overweight. It's got diabetes. It's got heart problems, and there's no way it's going to get anywhere near a football field.
I remember, speaking of General Milley or Miley or however you say his name. I remember
Thoroughly modern Millie.
I remember at one time he made a rational statement at one time, and they must have taken him behind the closed doors, and from that moment on, his the lunacy of his statements were so out in the ether zone that you couldn't believe it, because at first he was saying that, listen, we need to bring this conflict to a head and negotiate. And it seemed like as soon as he said that, the powers that be behind closed doors brought him in, and the next day he was singing a different tune.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, isn't that? I mean, even what I'm trying to say is that he, being the so-called Joint Chiefs of Staff, the head of the military, shouldn't he give pushback to those behind? If America's national security is in his interest and his number one priority, shouldn't he be willing to take the heat from his bosses to tell them, listen, they can outproduce us, they can outgun us? And even Obama said this, and you know, I have a high disdain for him because of the policies he's implemented. But even he said that Russia has escalatory dominance on the European continent, the Eurasian continent. So knowing that, and even I guess the new CIA director, I forget his name, he even wrote a piece.
Bill Burns.
Yes, when he was the ambassador of Russia, but net means net or something like that, meaning that he wrote a thing, an article, or a paper on that if America continues to push Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine, that it would wind up into a military confrontation, and Russia would not allow this to happen. I mean, knowing this, and why so much? Why are the leaders of America so out of touch with reality when they've had these things on their desks for so long?
Well, this is common throughout history, I guess, is the best way to say it. We are not the first nation to be so self-absorbed in our own mythology that we refuse to step back and take an honest look and say, okay, where are we, and what do we need to do, or are we doing what we can do to be the best we are? You know, with Milley, all I can suggest is that he's a coward, and by virtue of being a coward, I mean he's not willing to risk his career to speak the truth. Instead, go along, get along, and then at the end, you get to go to Lockheed Martin or Raytheon or Northrop Grumman and get a nice office or a nice payday as a member of the board. So why jeopardize that? It's not just Milley. You know, let's look back over the last 20 years. You didn't have a single senior officer in the lead up to the war in Iraq in 2003 stand up and resign their commission and say, this is wrong, this is going to be a disaster, we shouldn't do it. Not one. Because Well, they didn't want to risk their payday. They didn't want to risk their retirement. So that kind of courage is rare. It's rare. It exists once in a while, but the lesson that history teaches is that the people that stand up and try to speak the truth, they end up getting punished. I mean, I wrote a piece the other day saying, "Are you a Galileo?" You know, if you go back to Galileo and in the it was the 1500s initially and into the 1600s, it's just as America was being founded, or the colonies started rising here in what was in North America. Uh, Galileo had the audacity to insist that the Earth revolved around the sun, whereas the existing theology of the time, not just with the Catholic Church, but the conventional wisdom was, oh no, no, everything revolves around the Earth, which is sort of where the United States is right now. Everything revolves around us. It all goes around, and we're the center of attention. Uh, and so Galileo persisted with that and ended up being punished. He was sentenced to death. It was never carried out, but he was shunned. He was exiled. He was canceled, to put it in a modern parlance. Um, that's what we face today. Anybody that dares speak up and raise an alternative viewpoint, particularly with respect to what's going on in Ukraine and U.S. policy. Uh, Active efforts to cancel. We've seen the same with any comments regarding COVID and vaccines. If you've got the wrong point of view, you get canceled, you get shut up. Well, that doesn't prevent truth from ultimately coming out and prevailing, but it does mean that it sets the people up for destruction who are going through that kind of thing.
Okay. I'm gonna put something up here because we have a troll, I guess a troll in the chat. So I'm gonna put this up and I'm gonna give them their 5 seconds of fame and I'll address them because they don't have the numbers that I have on my screen. So I'm gonna address them real quick since they want a few
Okay.
seconds of fame. Only 6 people watching. My man, excuse me, Miss Shaniqua, whatever McAdams. That is probably on your screen, but my screen is showing me roughly 89 or 90. Is going up from 80 to 100 and some. So what you see is not what I see, and what I see is not what you see because I have a dashboard that shows me more in-depth coverage than you do. So you've had your 5 seconds of fame. Now let's take you off the screen and go to something more. All right. So sometimes you have to address the trolls, not ban them if they're not disrespectful, but address them and keep going. But
Right.
what Miss Shaniqua, whatever, whoever this is, should have been asking is, what is the matter with the leadership? See, they side. This is a. I think this is a. It is pervasive all across American society, and it seeps down from the leadership when someone is presenting to them something that they don't understand or they may not agree with, they sidebar and they take you to something that does not matter at all and get you away from the points that matter. As though I was getting ready to ask you about Millie, when you were talking about Millie, see, they can't take me off my points. I'm too sharp for that, but Millie is willing to not willing to risk his career. And my question to you is, and because you were talking about that, and you were talking about other leaders, so they are so concerned with their career that they're not willing to risk their career. But do they realize that the policies that they're pushing risk total all life on the planet? And without life, you have no career.
Yeah.
Without life, you have no nation, no military, no nothing. They are pushing policies that could lead to thermonuclear war.
Yeah. You would hope that they would consider that, take that under uh, their hat and think about it, but they don't. I mean, that's what's really sort of shocking. I think what we're seeing across the board in the United States, and it's not unique to the United States, but it is really sort of a prevalent theme in our era right now, the lack of accountability. So when you're a child growing up, and I don't know about, I suspect the same is for what you went through and what I went through. If I got out of line, there were consequences to be paid. And usually my father would deliver some of the consequences, but mothers too. And you learned, hopefully you learned growing up that you had to be accountable for your actions, that you were responsible. And we've created really is an entire entitled generation of people who can get away with just about anything as long as they've got the right political connections, as long as they're wealthy enough or famous enough that they don't suffer any real consequences for their actions. And we've seen this in Congress, both the Senate and the House. We've seen this in the presidency. Example, there is not one person fired in the Bush administration for the failure to prevent or attack the 9/11 attacks. Not one. Who got fired over our debacles in Iraq and Afghanistan? Not anybody. So it sends the message that you can screw up as long as you don't stir the pot and create a problem. And I had a discussion with a friend of mine, retired, he's retired Army enlisted guy, but he was a sergeant major. But more importantly, when he left as a sergeant major, he was a senior intelligence official with the Defense Intelligence Agency. And he told me multiple stories of times where he came up with intelligence that indicated that something was getting ready to happen. And when he tried to warn about it and present that information, he got slapped down and he got threatened. Why? Well, he was going to make the other people look bad because they hadn't come up with it. And so how could he, some low-level guy, make these other people look bad? So therefore, we don't want the truth, just don't make them look bad. That is what's going on. That is the unfortunate reality, that they don't want to hear the truth. And there's a reason why the fables, remember the king with no clothes, where they told a story, and that was written because this existed way back then, where people and their desire to suck up to the leadership and to not speak the truth would go along with the most ridiculous nonsense. Yeah, the king, nobody wants to say the king's naked as a jaybird. No, those are beautiful clothes, skin colored. But, but please, here we are today, which, people want to pretend that Joe Biden is a competent, intact president. I mean, come on. The man's mentally demented and is inarticulate, among other things. So but we go along with this hoax that, oh yeah, he's a competent president. He can be trusted with nuclear weapons. And those who try to raise that as an issue, we end up getting attacked.
Yeah, but they don't attack this man doing a speech and then going to the side of the stage and shaking the hands of the air.
Yeah.
But it's and the media buries that. It buries it. But and then they'll put you on the fringe of the they'll say, when you point these things out, you are a right-wing extremist or something. But I want to go back to something to one of our listeners, Shaniqua. She said and I apologize, but the way you worded your statement made us think that you were a troll. But she said that she was not trolling. She said that she was just stating because when she popped on, she saw a certain number and she thought it was a shame because the show is a good show. And she was saying that
bless her heart.
Liked the interview. So we apologize for that. It's just that we try to keep the trolls down to a minimum, and you just got caught in the crossfire. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Now, I want to talk about the U.S. policy in Ukraine, but I also want to talk about the U.S. policy with China. But before that, someone else stated this. I'll bring them up real quick. It says, I'm starting to, this is from Jenna BN. She said, I'm starting to think the U.S. or the grown-ups on NATO's side compared to UK, who have just announced they'll supply depleted uranium ammo to Ukraine. Well, I'll say this, and then I'll let him take over and say this. I know what Dmitry Medvedev said, and he said that the supply of depleted uranium would be, in Russia's case, they would constitute that as using weapons of mass destruction against the Russian Federation, and that will receive all of the ramifications of using a nuclear weapon or chemical weapons against the Russian Federation. Now you can.
I've the Brits are the most out of touch with reality in this. They're still look at them for what they are. These are former colonial masters. They helped create slavery. They made slavery into a business. Okay, so like one of the criticisms with the 1619 project in the United States is America was born in slavery. No, it was the British. The British brought that over. That was a British institution. That wasn't, quote, an American institution for starters. And then the Brits literally enslaved much of the world. They did it in some cases with an air of sophistication, but they've lost their empire. So now with the lost empire, they're desperate to try to have some sort of control and relevance today. And as you correctly noted, Rashid, any use of a depleted uranium round in Ukraine will be viewed by the Russians as a use of a dirty bomb. It is radioactive material being thrown at Russian soldiers, and Russia will respond and will retaliate. And you've got to ask, what is this accomplishing? Because when you look on the ground, what is actually happening, we have not had a single example in the last, since February of 2022, where the Ukrainians have attacked a defended, fortified Russian position and forced the Russians to retreat. The offensives last September in Kherson and Kharkov, there were border police. The Russian didn't have a troop presence. They didn't have the kind of artillery in place they'd need to hold off in advance. So they made a tactical withdrawal under fire, but it was nonetheless a tactical withdrawal. Whereas Russia has consistently demonstrated it has the ability to attack defended, fortified Ukrainian positions and take them over. They did it in Mariupol. They've done it in Lysychansk, Soledar. They're doing it in Bakhmut. They're doing it in Avdiivka. They're doing it in Ugledar. They continue to move forward in doing it. And the Ukrainians cannot stop them. So at some point, you need to have a realistic touch, have a touch with reality to recognize Russia's not as terrible and ineffective and weak as we claim they are, and Ukraine is certainly not as strong as we claim they are. That's been the British. That's been the problem with the Brits. The Brits are heavily invested in Ukraine, and this really goes back to World War II, the aftermath of World War II, where the Brits wanted to weaken the Soviet Union, and so they actively embraced, protected Ukrainians who had been allied with the Nazis, and that has lingered. That's been part of their heritage for the last 80 years.
Let me bring up another one. It says English, not British, says only those with feeble minds seek to discredit the truth tellers. Take no notice. God bless you both. Thank you. We really appreciate that. And he was talking to us. God
nice.
Bless both of us. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. I want to say this. Isn't it a reality that Russia is not only beating Ukraine, but in one fell swoop, they're also defanging the NATO alliance and beating the entire Western world on the battlefield?
Yeah, well, the West has continued to invest and deploy so-called advanced weapons systems to some extent. The HIMARS, the 155 millimeter rounds, I don't know if you recall, is last April, May, somewhere there, when they first started, when the West first started providing the HIMARS. Scott Ritter and I had a let's call it a disagreement. It was not intense, but Scott said that this was, quote, a game changer. And I said, no, it's not a game changer at all. Because to me, a game changer is you introduce that weapon system and all of a sudden Russia is going to be on its heels and getting back. Well, that didn't happen. And in fact, Russia became very skilled at hitting and destroying those missile batteries. And the game changer is Russia has exposed the West as not having the economic depth to produce more of those missiles and stay in the fight. It is not ready for industrial warfare. So it is from the Russia is fighting a war against NATO. NATO, though, has been very cautious not to overtly insert its own forces onto the battlefield, even though there are troops from NATO nations operating in Ukrainian uniforms on the battlefront, and they're getting killed and wounded just like Ukrainians. For Russia, what this really has, this has changed completely the strategic picture of the world. The West intent was to destroy Russia, take out Vladimir Putin, divide the country up into 5 regions, and rape the hell out of it. Take all the resources we could get. That's what we wanted. Well, we're not going to get that. Russia's still standing, and has aligned with China, and is aligning with India, is aligning with South Africa, is aligning with Brazil, will probably align with Argentina, with Saudi Arabia. So all of a sudden, the countries that used to be sort of beholden or willing to work with the United States, they're saying, kissing Uncle Sam goodbye and saying, let's go to Mother Russia. And it's really, we're witnessing, this is a historic moment. We're witnessing the creation of a new world order, a new world economic and political order in which the United States will no longer be number one. It may be one among equals, but it's not going to be able to exert the same sort of power and reach that it did over the last 70 years since the end of World War II.
And something that goes over a lot of people's heads as we're talking about the makeup of a new order. Not only was China, and even though Xi has the most publicity right now, not only was President Xi Jinping in China, but the delegates of 40 African nations were also there at the same time with Russia, and they're trying to cobble up some kind of economic and trade union outside of the Western led order. What will that mean for the U.S. dollar's dominance and the Western world? Because America needs the dollars, because if you use dollars, she gets a fee. She can manipulate your economy. What does that mean as these nations move outside of dollar dominance?
Well, before we just comment on the fact that the meeting in Russia highlighted something very important. The West constantly describes Russia as an imperialist power. Oh, really? Give me the list of the countries that Russia took over, imposed its rule on, exploited the local people, stole the resources. Just one. Can't name it because it was not Russia. Russia was not an imperialist power. Look at what Europe did to Africa. Europe raped Africa. Europe helped in, yes, the slave trade started in Africa, and there were different African tribes kidnapped other Africans, different tribal people, enslaving them, selling them to the Europeans. Europeans happy to do that business, but the Europeans were actively involved with slavery and oppression in Africa. I mean, the concentration camp the British invented in South Africa prior to the Nazis coming up with it. So you had Germans, you had French, you had Brits, you had Dutch. Africa the Europeans treated the Africans like inferiors, second class, third class citizens, sometimes not even close to being a human being. The Russians never did that. They didn't have that in that's not in their genetics. Think of yourself, if you're a small child and you're growing up and you're watching your Caucasian parent order a black man or woman about like some subservient animal. Well, that's gonna create a mindset in you, and it's going to affect how you see people of a darker color. Well, the Russians don't have that in their heritage. So from the Russian standpoint, they're sitting there going, you know, these these are people who've been exploited, and we're going to deal with them as human beings on an equal footing basis. And the Africans realized that. The United States during the Cold War got away with portraying, oh, those communists are going to come in and subvert you. Well, Russia's now capitalist, fully capitalist, and it's Christian. But even though it's a Western Christian, it's an Eastern Orthodox Christian faith, it embraces Islam and other religions because it is a very multi-ethnic country. And they found a way to peacefully coexist with all of those. So all of a sudden now, the U.S. dollar, the United States has become like the loan shark in your neighborhood. Okay, you need some extra cash. Okay, yeah, I'll lend you 20. You owe me 25 next week, and if you don't have the 25, we're going to break your knees. That's what having the U.S. dollar as your friend has become. Because if the United States decides for whatever reason it doesn't like what you do, we're going to sanction you. We're going to you. We're sanction you. Well, when you start sanctioning the whole world, guess what? You end up angering everybody else that they no longer want to cooperate with you or do anything to help you. And it's just the foolish, stupid policy I've ever seen. But the United States has gotten away with it for years with bullying Africans, and that's doing
it. Last week I was reading, I think it was last week. It could have been, yeah, it was last week. At the end of last week, I was reading an article on Press TV. And one of the diplomats from Press TV was telling the interviewer that now since America seems to want to use this sanctions tool on everybody, Iran, Russia, China, Venezuela, and some African countries are now getting together outside the dollar, and they're going to bring in all of these sanctioned countries to do trade and business outside of the dollar. And my thing is, by saying that is, why aren't the leaders of America swift enough to pick up that if I alienate these people economically and alienate these people economically and threaten these people militarily regardless of the little disagreement between these two, they see a common interest, and that common interest may bring them together to fight against the big bully. Why is that not resonating in the head of, well, I won't say Joe Biden because we know he's not in control, but why is that not resonating in at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and also the Pentagon and the State Department?
It makes you wonder why they call it common sense, because you're reflecting a lot of it, but it's not very common. It's sort of uncommon sense is really what it is. And it's remarkable because you can see it, I can see it, certainly the people that it's happening to can see it, but for some reason, the United States continues to believe that if we just threaten other countries enough that they will come around to doing our bidding. And yet history just teaches us otherwise. That's why I've always, the meme I've promoted on my blog at sonar21.com is the appearance of Christopher Walken, where he was they had the fake Blue Oyster Cult band, and they were playing a song, and he keeps coming out saying, "We need more cowbell, more cowbell." So it's like no matter what happens, we need more cowbell. And in this case, our more cowbell is more sanctions. No matter what happens, hey, we're going to sanction you, and we're going to sanction you. We're like a sick Oprah Winfrey. Instead of giving a car away, we're giving away sanctions.
Yeah, and in fact, as a matter of fact, Jenna BN says the U.S. thinks it's too big to fail, which is an apt description of American politics, whether it be domestically or internationally, because they are now after Trump. They're trying. They're talking about arresting him, and then they're talking about arresting the rest of the world that does not subscribe to the so-called rules-based order. This, to me, I'm sitting back and I'm saying these people are lunatics. Yeah, any person with common sense, or anyone with a bit of common sense, can sit back and look at the whole landscape and say these people are lunatics.
Well, the US so-called rules-based international order. This is like the team that you're playing football with. They get to make the rules, number one. So here's the first rule. Whenever we kick the ball, you got to lay down on the ground and let us run over you. Okay, that's rule number one. Rule number two, if you get the ball, you got to fall on the ground so we can tackle you. So, it's completely lopsided. The example was this arrest warrant for Putin out of the so-called International Criminal Court in The Hague. Does the United States recognize the jurisdiction of that court? Oh, hell no. If that court filed any charges against anyone, we threaten to go blow them up. So, the one thing we should have said was that this court is out of line, out of bounds. But instead, we want to jump on and say, oh, yeah, this Putin, he's broad, you can't deal with him. When in fact, the actual evidence will show the Russians were not stealing children for criminal sex trafficking rings. They were rescuing children that were in combat zones because the Ukrainian government itself continued to shell areas that were children. They continued to take over schools and hospitals. So it was a rescue mission, and it's very open. There's no nothing hidden behind the curtain on this one. But again, the West doesn't see the truth. They don't want to recognize what's going on.
So, and the lunacy of this is this: they issue a arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin for saving Russian children that were under gunfire by U.S. backed and U.S. armed and U.S. trained Ukrainian troops with Western mercenaries, and they don't arrest the leaders who negotiated the deal for peace in Ukraine, and then they got on TV and said, "Well, that was just to buy time. We were going to retake these areas." They forget that part, that the Western leaders are the cause of this, of the shelling, the war, the fighting, and everything. But no, the ICC or whatever doesn't seem to be preoccupied with that. It's just preoccupied with arresting Russia's president. And Germany says that we will enforce the ICC ruling, and if Putin comes to Germany, we will arrest him. Does the prosecutor understand that that is a declaration of war?
Yeah. Well, the reality is, when Putin goes to Germany, it will be because the Russian army has taken over Berlin once again, and Putin will be walking in as the victor, and he'll be arresting Germans, not the other way around. I mean, that is just, it was a stupid comment. That's why I say what alarms me is we don't see anybody, with the exception of Viktor Orban in Hungary, and Vucic, I think, in Croatia, that are speaking out against this escalation. And so they're really, all the other language coming out of the UK, out of Germany in particular, out of France, out of NATO with Stoltenberg, is very confrontational, very aggressive, and not looking for any off ramp. Instead, they're trying to say, look, let's throw another log on the fire. Fire's not hot enough.
And on that, we'll transition to China real quick. But I want to piggyback off what we were just saying about the lunacy of what's going on with the sanctions and everything. And there's an article on that came out today on RT, and the headline is this: ex-U.S. envoy wants Russian billionaires to pay their way out of sanctions. Is this extortion?
Yeah. Like I said,
Yeah.
that loan shark here in my neighborhood, yeah, that's how he operates too.
This is and they do what's crazy about it is it's blatant. It's not behind closed doors. It's blatant in your face.
Yeah.
International piracy and extortion. They're in Syria, stealing the oil, taking it over to Iraq, refining it, and then moving it out, selling it, and giving barrels of it to Israel. And then they're occupying the soil rich part of the rich, let's say the breadbasket of Syria, and taking the wheat and the corn and away so that Syria will starve to death. And nobody is saying it. I mean, this is international piracy and extortion everywhere.
Yeah.
And how can a nation, again, how can a nation or an empire continue to go on if it is going to do this and be so blatant about it?
It's just like how you go about building friends and a social network. If you're that type of guy that's always out threatening your friends and abusing them and taking their money, and they're not going to be happy to see you coming around. Whereas if you're the guy that goes up, you got a bottle of wine every time you come visit, you're offering gifts, you're friendly, you're saying, hey, what can I do to help you? You're moving today, let me come over and help you carry some of that furniture. Oh, hey, I can come wash your, when you're that kind of guy, you actually end up being popular. Same thing applies with nations. And the United States is just, it pains me to say it. I love the principles that this country was founded upon in terms of the ideas of equality and treating everybody the same, not making distinctions according to race, religion, or sex. But by God, we got to recognize what we are and what we become in the world. We think we scream about the possibility of foreign influence in our elections. And hell, that's all we've done over the last 70 years is meddled in the elections of other people. So if it's not good for us, then maybe we shouldn't do it to others. I'm an old believer in that Bible principle. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. There's some that let's live by that rule.
Yeah. Cece says, let's see. I heard that over 100 private jets flew in to meet Warren Buffett over the systemic bank failure. Even POTUS was in attendance.
Yeah, I wouldn't surprise me. This is, the global economic situation is really it's imperiled. And again, part of that goes back to the fact that now China and Russia are working together to create an alternative to the United States dominance. So when the United States banned Russia from SWIFT, that was, that's like playing that game Jenga, where you pull out the logs and eventually the tower collapses. That was pulling out the first one. It's going to make it very unstable.
Now, let's see where. Okay, for those of you who are looking at the show, I have my window up, my screen up, and the chickens are scratching outside. I live in the county area, and the chickens are scratching outside the window. So if you hear the noise, those are the chickens outside. But let's pivot to China real quick. Is this not a lunatic, or I call it a berserker policy? The largest trade partner, your largest financier, your largest manufacturer, 93% of all goods are produced by China that are on the shelves in America.
Yeah.
What rational or sound thinking of a person makes them go and provoke the people who supply the dashboards to your computers, the dashboards, to some of your weapon systems, to um, everything from your flags to your uniforms to your boots. And do they sit down and think of the ramification of their policies? Let's just take, for instance, let's say America sanctions China and goes into an economic war with China or goes into a military war with China. Do they believe that China will continue to ship the goods over? And if China, if common sense tells us that China would stop sending goods, that means that all of the stores would lose 90% of their products, 90 to 93% of their products, which means that the stores would go bankrupt and close. That means that there will be massive unemployment. That means that the shipping companies that ship the stuff would go bankrupt. And the banks that made the loans to the trucking and shipping companies would have to deal with a massive domino effect of defaults, which would then hit the banking system, which would cause unheard of calamities across the United States. Does anybody in Washington think about these things when they are talking about the China threat? On one hand, we say that we recognize Taiwan or Chinese Taipei as an integral part of China. And on the other hand, we foment independence and supplying of arms. I mean, how can you make sense of this?
Yeah. We are witnessing a form of mass insanity is the only way I can describe it, because it is, let's put it down on a personal level. Let's say that I'm dependent upon you. You supply all of diabetes medicine. I'm not diabetic, but let's just say I'm diabetic. You supply all my heart medicine, and you supply all the critical minerals I need to for the business that I run. And oh yeah, you're holding a bunch of my money. So the right thing for me to do is start calling you names and threatening you, right? Yeah, because you're going to go, what's wrong with this fool? You know, you don't get to talk to me that way. I'm not going to put up with this. That's how human beings will handle this. Well, guess what? Countries react the same way. And we've got Republicans and Democrats alike calling China our greatest enemy. They're the greatest threat. They're our enemy. You know, we're going to have to go to war with them by 2025. We're going to go to war. They're our enemy. Well, you know, the Chinese may be a lot of things. They may be corrupt. They may be economic exploiters, but they're not stupid. And when they hear those kinds of threats coming out of the United States, they take it on board. They say those Americans believe what they're saying. So that's one of the things why China is in Russia today. The West keeps warning the Chinese, you better not give any lethal weapons to Russia. Russia doesn't need the damn Chinese weapons. The Chinese need the Russian weapons. The Chinese need Russia's air defense systems. They already use the S-400. Now the Russians have the S-500, which can defeat ballistic missiles that the United States could fire at China. So guess what? China's going to get S-500 systems from Russia. The Chinese have some hypersonic missiles, but their range is limited. Guess what? Russia's got 3 types of hypersonic missiles that can go out and hit any carrier battle group that dares approach the shores of China. China's going to get that. So China is moving very quickly with this alliance with Russia. And as we noted earlier, this is without precedent in history. This is a historical moment that we're living through, where the rise of the China-Russia partnership, because they each have something they need, but the West likes to portray Russia as sort of the little brother in this relationship, and China's the big brother, and Russia needs China more. No, Russia's on equal footing, because Russia's got the weapons that China needs, and Russia's got the oil and gas. And China's got some political clout, and by virtue of its size, as you correctly noted, it's this enormous economic power from an industrial standpoint. Put those two together, all of a sudden, you're talking some serious clout. And the United States and Europe can't match it. They don't have anything come close to matching it. And that reality is going to be dawning upon people slowly over the course of the next year or two. It's just, people say, well, you're just a Putin apologist or you love Xi Jinping. And I just, mama made me smart enough that I can go outside, and if it's raining, I'll say, you know what, I made it better take an umbrella.
Yeah.
Instead of denying, oh, it's not raining, that's just a large bird.
Speaking of what you just said about equal footing, it's ironic you say that, and I read an article that Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, they both penned articles in their respective other nations' newspapers, and each one they were talking about there is no, and I'm paraphrasing, no big brother, little brother axis. This is on an equal footing.
Yeah.
There's no bigger or better than. They're equal, and it says that the friendship is unlimited and unending, and it cannot be stopped. And
right.
I think the United States throws shade at that because they see and they're starting to recognize the gravity of the alliance, the unspoken alliance between China and Russia. And what's crazy is, as we talked about, China being America's largest investor, largest trade partner, and largest manufacturer to ship stuff over. They're the same with Europe. And yet they want to demand that China adhere to their red lines. I mean, it is like you taking out a loan for your car, for your home, for your boat, for your family's vacation home, and then you're taking out a loan so that you can live luxuriously. And then you go to the bank and say, hey, I know I have these loans, but you better not trample over my red lines. When everything that you have is dependent upon the good graces of the bank, you want to go and put stipulations and demand on the bank. This is insanity at the highest level.
Yeah, it's good to know that you and I are not the only crazy ones in this conversation, Rashid. Yeah, I mean, look, we may not be the sharpest tools in the drawer, but for God's sakes, you can see it, I can see it, and these people who are getting paid, the big money, they're not paying attention. It's like that old joke where Henry Kissinger was on board a plane and the plane's getting ready to go down, and there was only one parachute, and we got into some sort of argument. And anyway, Henry Kissinger said that he should go first since he's the smartest guy, so he jumps out of the plane. And the other passengers, one looks at the other and says, "Well, the smartest guy in the plane just jumped out with handling with a seat cushion. He didn't have the parachute. That kind of thing."
Good one. Hey, Free New World says, how will the USA bases be faded away around China due to the fact that the American economy fails or failures? You can take that question.
Yeah. No, listen, the economic situation in the United States is going to dictate what the United States can continue to do overseas. Really, if the presence of our military bases overseas was a function of us fighting the Soviets during the Cold War to prove that our system was better than their system. And so now we got these legacy bases all over the world. Well, now it's just, I call it the jobs program for white guys, from the standpoint of you got to have all these generalships and all these command situations, and so the majority of them are white. So it's a jobs program for them, so we can keep these military. So we can have the most expensive military in the world, right? Not the best, but we got the most expensive. At some point, that economic reality is going to come home, and we're going to have to say, we need to shut this down, and we're going to have to start bringing troops home. That will eventually happen. The era, just as there was a time when the British controlled, and they had bases all around the world, and they were in control. Well, they've had to pull back and retrench. Hell, their current army, they couldn't fill Alabama's football stadium with it. Okay, so this is reality is going to intrude. We can indulge these fantasies, but at some point, reality comes and faces us, and we have to wake up.
Well,
Hence the
again,
name. Hence the name of your channel, the Red Pill. You're red pilling these people, trying to get them to wake up.
Yeah, yeah. But again, what you just said about eventually they will be brought back home. My thing is, do you want to be forced back within your own borders, or do you want to come back with a little dignity behind your borders? Because when you're forced back due to economic constraints and military defeats, the people that you antagonize are not going to go soft on you. They're gonna hit you while you're down, and they're gonna talk about you, and they're gonna vilify you as you vilified them. Does the leadership even think about these things?
No. In fact, they don't even really contemplate the real possibility that we could have our cities bombed, missiles, submarine launched missiles, air launched missiles by Russians or Chinese in ways that we've never faced this kind of threat in our history. The British invaded us back in 1812. That's because we started the war in Canada. That was, we started that, not the Brits. And then Pancho Villa riding along the border, doing some border raids back in 1916, 1917. But apart from that, the United States has never actually faced the threat of being hit. I guarantee you that if we launch any kind of strikes inside Russia, Russia will retaliate, and the retaliation will come in the continental United States. And we're not ready for that. This is the most dangerous time in my lifetime. I was born in '55, so this is we've been through the Cuban Missile Crisis and some other things, but this is genuinely the most dangerous because we don't have any adults in charge in Washington, D.C. I mean, there is no adult. We got a bunch of children. I mean, Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken, for God's sake, with Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and run down the list. It's a clown show. It is a clown show. We don't, I look back at a period where Brent Scowcroft was the national security advisor to George H.W. Bush. And that man was a class act. That was smart, very smart. Or you go back to George C. Marshall, who is still in place under both Truman and FDR before him. So we don't have men or women of that caliber. We really have some intellectually inferior. They may have been able to pass tests. They're not smart, and they're certainly not three-dimensional thinkers. They're very myopic in their viewpoints, and it's dangerous, really dangerous.
I call it the Washington romper room, because it seems like every last one of them are in special. And this is no shot at people in special needs, but it seems like all of them is something missing up here. It's like it's like the radio is on, but they're not receiving the messages or something like that. Maybe a fuse is blown or something like that. But Free New World says, Larry Johnson, thank you for sharing your wonderful knowledge with us.
Very nice, but thank you.
And English, but not British, says, I think there is more at stake than Ukraine. Well, there is, and everybody says it. Says maybe when Russia wins, the real reason behind this conflict will come to light. Well, maybe you can expound on that just for a second.
Well, I think one of the things that will become then apparent was this was not just about trying to bring Ukraine into NATO. The ultimate desire. Well, my dog's just decided to come in. I got two Rottweilers here. The NATO was expanding towards Ukraine, but it was not just about trying to. Yeah, huh? These two, they're 130 pounds each, and they decided to come in. They needed some love because my wife left, went off on an appointment. So if you see me moving, that's because they're moving and sitting here nudging me. The United States, well, come on, the United States, yeah, here, come here, black man, come up here, come up here, come here, come here, come here. See, say hello. Say here, turn this way. Say hello. Oh, I know. So, see,
Yeah.
say hello. Okay. All right. Yeah. So the United States was doing a lot behind the scenes, like with these biolabs. That was being funded for a purpose, and I don't know the full reason for it, what they had in mind, but that's the revelations that will come to light. The different financial relationships of the different families, not just the Bidens. John Kerry's family has benefited from it. I bet you the Bushes have got some economic skin in the game there, that they're getting money. So it is the corruption level that the Clintons. There was a reason why Ukrainian individuals were the largest donors to the Clinton Foundation. They weren't doing it because they were generous souls who wanted to fight the spread of AIDS. They're buying influence, they're buying access, and this is money. This is money to make money. That's what it's all about. So what we're looking at is there will be a lot more fallout. Some think that that the Chinese may try to negotiate a peace. I don't see any basis for that whatsoever. One, because the United States and Europe are dead set against it. Ukraine is totally reliant on the West, and there's no way that China is going to step in and tell Ukraine, "Oh yeah, we'll send you billions of dollars to help support your drug habit." No, that's not happening. Russia recognizes that this Nazi element that is within the Ukrainian political sphere, while it may be a minority, it's a powerful minority and wields enormous influence. It's got to be exterminated, completely eradicated, because it's a noxious weed that is ultimately intent upon destroying Russia if it can. And it has they have no qualms at all about all the Ukrainians that they could destroy. This is just a horrific, terrible war. But it was Russia. I take you back year by year since the coup, the Western-backed coup in 2014, which ousted a president democratically elected that was aligned with Russia and brought in a hand-picked successor by the West. And then every year since then, the NATO and European Command were conducting military exercises in Ukraine on the borders of Russia. And it was quite clear, preparing to go to war with Russia. That's what this was all about. What they want at the end of the day, take resources that Russia is blessed with. It is this last gold mine on the face of the earth, and the West wants it. Not going to get it, but they want
it. Yeah. Dwight Anderson says, "Thanks for the knowledge, my two brothers." And let's see. Mehdi said, "It's a question for you." Here, Mehdi poses this question for you, Mr. Johnson. I was just wondering what you would think about the possibility of a showdown between the UN and BRICS over who is gonna, I think they mean rule the world. Who is the world going to trust to be able to deliver justice for Ukraine?
Yeah, that's the relevance of the UN is diminishing with each passing day. It is not a fair organization, and the United States and the Brits keep hollering about the fact that Russia and China have veto power. Well, why Britain is even allowed on the United Nations Security Council is beyond me. They're a nobody, okay? They're a nobody. Same with France. But, that's one of the legacies of the so-called victors of World War II, except Britain didn't win a damn thing. They held out. But if it wasn't for Russia and with help from the United States, the Nazis would have taken over London and the rest of Great Britain. So they try to dictate this as far as being in control, but I see the BRICS presenting a real alternative to the powers of the post-World War II institutions, not just the UN, but the IMF, the World Bank. So the BRICS countries are going to be setting a new agenda, because they can make a very sound case that, hey, India, if by terms of population and economic activity, India is one of the biggest countries in the world. They ought to be on that Security Council. China definitely deserves to be there. Russia deserves to be there. United States, maybe
South
Brazil,
Africa.
Yeah, and South Africa. So, or Nigeria. As I understand, Nigeria is larger actually than South Africa. Nigeria's got, and Indonesia. What about Indonesia? They've got one of the largest parties. So, right now, if you're going to set up an international system that's genuinely international, that respects the rights of everyone, but what you've got at the UN right now, it's a Western-dominated system, and the so-called third world countries, they get a back seat.
Well, in close, we want to thank Larry for joining. That's my guy right there. This guy's solid. Larry, is it anything that you want to tell everyone before you head out?
Well, I tell you what, if you believe in prayer, pray for this nation and for this world. These are dangerous times. We need men and women to stand up, to speak truth, and to try to get everyone to walk away from the brink of a nuclear disaster, because that's really what confronts us. And I pray we survive it, brother.
Yeah. Hey, Larry, thank you for coming on the show. I'll send you the link in about 5 minutes to the show. And be blessed, and I'll talk to you soon, remember?
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. For those of you who are listening to the show, we'd like to thank you for joining us. Please join us tomorrow. We're going to try to go live tomorrow to do the show. Also, we're supposed to have Thursday or Friday, we're supposed to have RT and Sputnik journalist Helen Beninsky on the show, and she's going to chop it up about her knowledge about what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in Ukraine, and what's going on with the China situation, and also what's going on with Latin America. So we'll try to have her on. You guys, thank you. Don't forget to hit the like button, because they continue to keep us out of the engine. And I'm putting together, my son is trying to put together something for you guys before we go. We've been taking pictures of what YouTube has been doing, and every time we get 200 subscribers, YouTube takes like 100 and something. And every time the number goes up on the watch list, within an hour or two, it goes back down. It goes lower than it was before. So we're fighting against the tide, but we're going to continue to try to slug it out against the powers that be to get this truth out. On that note, we'd like to thank you for joining us. Join us again. And remember that we love you, but God will always love you best. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, stay righteous, because you're going to need to be righteous in this world, especially what's going on. And you got to look out for more than yourself. Look out for your neighbor. Look out for the person down the street. Look out, because things are about to go from 0 to 100 very soon. I love you all. God loves you best. And always, Mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Dude.